Thanks for clicking play, welcome to the video. In the last project I had a crazy idea where I put a fake Game Boy into some pallet wood. I'm going to do the YouTube thing and put it in the top corner. But ever since then I've been absolutely obsessed with different ways of making this, so I bought another fake Game Boy and I'm going to use the skills I learned in my beer mats video, which again you can see in the corner, and we're going to stick the two of these together. So first I need to open this thing up and check what's on the inside. Let's get to it. Really wasn't expecting it to be like a solid PCB on the inside. The last one I did, the screen and the main PCB had like a long bit of cable between them, so it's easy to work around it. This one has all sorts of horrible stuff that's going to be a problem. The volume button is stuck right to the side, so there's no space for a wooden edge. That's the same for the power switch at the top and the TV out thing. The battery connector is stuck right onto the circuit board, so I can't move that around. And the buttons are really close to the screen, which means everything's going to have to be super precise. I'm really not sure if this one's going to work.
I'm using 4mm plywood for this project, and these pieces were pulled off the bottom of some drawers, so that means the edges are ripped and I'm going to have to trim them down. Then I'm cutting them into 1-inch pieces to create a giant slab, but I really should have trimmed the rough edges off before starting. I didn't like the look of the flat edges on my beer mats project, so this one we're going to go at an angle, so there should be a really cool pattern all the way around. A quick sand and router to make sure it was perfectly flat, and these slabs ended up looking amazing. I removed the screen protector really carefully just in case I needed it, removed all the buttons, and then started tracing the button layout onto the wood. I learned from my mistakes in the Plyboy project, and I used the router to do the buttonholes this time so they're nice and clean.
I'm a bell end. Traced all this out perfectly, but it's supposed to go that way round. And now I've totally fucked it. I used the drill instead of the router, and the holes have gone in at an angle, which means on the other side they are completely fucked. Which is very frustrating because that means this piece of wood is now useless.
Round 2. I got a lot of tear out this time using the router, which was really annoying.
I thought this one was going to be amazing. The wood looked fantastic when I started and I thought, genius! But this has been an absolute sack of crap. So I'm going to push on and see if there's any way of finishing it.
Round 3. Luckily, I had enough left in my slab to do 2 more clean pieces, but if one of these failed, this project was done. For the D-pad, I drilled out most of it, used small files until I could use a big file, and this seemed to work perfectly. Even though the router made really clean buttonholes, they weren't quite big enough, so I did have to file them out a little bit. And there was no easy way of doing the start and select buttons, so I just drilled a few holes and then filed them out until they were right. Before I could check if the buttons were sitting properly, I had to make space for all the bits sticking out the circuit board. And to do this, I just had to file them out.
I was so close to it being done now, but because it's all on one circuit board, it's so tricky because everything has to be perfect and at the right height. And I've got no measurements to go off really. So what I'm having to do is shave a tiny bit away where the screen sits, put all the buttons back in and see if it meets up. If it doesn't, do the whole process again and again and again. And sometimes it goes so low that I've got to shave out the USB section and the headphone section as well. These tiny little bits are just taking forever to do. Hopefully we're really close. Yes!
Once the circuit board fit properly, I gave the inside a hand sand, and then it was time to move on to the battery section. I like to learn from my mistakes, so I'm using one of the pieces that's already ruined to test out this battery section.
Oh, I fucked it up again. Done it on the wrong side. Idiot. Ugh.
These 3M pads aren't to stick it to the circuit board, it's just to raise it up enough so that it hits the contact points properly. Now that the test piece works, it's time to cut the final slab. If I ruin this, it's game over.
So the battery looks like it fits, but I won't be able to tell until I turn it on. Before I turn it on, I've got to reconnect the speaker that I've accidentally ripped off. Got to sand the edges so they match up perfectly as well. And I've got to find a way of putting the two halves together. The bottom half is fine, there's loads of space to play around with, but at the top section, there's nothing. I don't know how I'm going to attach this, so I've got to figure that out. But yeah, we're pretty much there. I should be playing on this thing tonight.
To connect the front and back together, I decided to drill a hole that was just a bit too small for this bolt, crush it in the vise, and it seemed to sit perfectly. So I did the same thing for the next hole. I thought I had enough room to do the same on these side ones here, but once I'd pushed the bolts in, they kept coming out, so I had to use hot glue to keep them in place. The very end ones were definitely the trickiest. I went straight in with the hot glue gun, but if I'm going to make another one of these, I definitely need to find a better way of connecting the two halves. The rubber contact pad for the start and select button kept on shifting out of place, so I used the hot glue gun to build up a platform to keep it where it needed to be, and it worked. All that was left was to assemble it for the final time and see if I could actually play it.
Kaboom! Here it is, the finished product. Now, if the first one was called Pallet Boy, it only makes sense that this one be called Ply Boy. As you saw in the video, this one was a bit of a nightmare to make. The edges around the screen aren't straight. There's little chips in the top corner where I used an electric chisel to carve it out, and I should have cut it out properly. The holes where the speaker go, I was trying to be really neat, but because the material in plywood is different strengths, the holes went wonky. If I'd had a drill press, it would have went a lot straighter. The space where the volume wheel goes, it's not great. I think maybe if I was careful with a router, I could get enough space to make that work. The switch at the top, you need to use a screwdriver to actually turn it on. And the rubber contact pads behind the D-pad and the buttons actually fell away after a bit of time, so I did have to go back and hot glue them in place. But apart from that, I absolutely love this one. The emulator I bought has actual Game Boy games on it, not cheap knockoff ones, so that's really fun to play with. It feels super awesome. I sanded it down with something like 400 grit sandpaper, so it's super smooth. It looks so cool. Like the lines and the different textures just looks awesome. Obviously, I learned a lot from this one, so we can improve the next version. Routing this thing was an absolute nightmare, and that is because I've only got that big beastie router, so I need to invest in a smaller router. When you're working in such small detail as well, the plywood tends to splinter quite quickly, so I need to learn how to use epoxy resin. I also think I might need a smaller soldering iron and experiment with removing things like the volume wheel, the power button, just so I can take them a little bit further away from the edge and have a tiny bit more room to work around. And if I get to do those two tests and it goes properly, I want to try a Game Boy, like an actual Game Boy. But I've got a few projects on the go at the moment, got a few stages I've got to learn before I get there, so we'll see if that one happens. Like all my projects, I'm going to be listing it on my Etsy store with a stupid price. If it sells, that will go towards tools, so I can do more projects and I can make cooler things, quicker, better, easier, fancier, all that kind of stuff. But as usual, thanks very much for watching. If you've got any tips, questions or suggestions, stick them in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm going to go play this thing. See ya!